deny it, it's all true. But everybody still wants to live here. This city's always got a promise for you. Might be a lie, an illusion, but it's there, just around the corner, and it keeps you going.
I know I wasn't the only one with high expectations for Cyberpunk 2077. Can you blame me? Between the quality of CD Projekt Red's prior work and the sky-high ambitions they laid out in a tsunami of marketing leading up to 2077's launch, there was reason to think that this game might hit that rare Fallout New Vegas high watermark of immersive 3D open-world action role-playing. Not to mention, CD Projekt was the company known for trend-defying, consumer-forward decision-making. Where their competitors in the industry were willing to do anything for $1, at least CD Projekt had their heads on straight. Thanks to the steady hand of CD Projekt's management and the wise counsel of their board of directors, the company enjoyed an unprecedentedly smooth launch in Cyberpunk 2077. Well, it didn't exactly turn out that way. By this point, we're all familiar with Cyberpunk 2077's beleaguered launch. Technical issues out the wazoo on every platform, performance on PlayStation so bad that Sony takes a move we've never seen them take with the launch of this profile: pull it from the store for technical inadequacy. We all know this story by this point. But through the fog of technical problems, even through that, given a few months of improvements and bug fixes, the Cyberpunk 2077 that we had in our heads, the game that was advertised, is still not quite the game that 2077 is, even when resuscitated to a working state. It's not a bad game by any means. The music is unambiguously amazing. The story is very good. So is the production value. There are lots of interesting side quests. There are many compliments that I can pay Cyberpunk 2077. But one compliment I cannot give the game is that it offers much by way of a role-playing experience. In a March 2021 CD Projekt strategy update video, Michal Nowakowski, Senior VP of Business Development at CD Projekt and member of the board, describes the three-step evolution of CD Projekt's ambitions with their single-player games over the years. With Witcher 1, they were going for a pure RPG. With Witcher 2 and 3, they were going for an RPG fused with action elements. Then, for Cyberpunk 2077, they were going for the triple threat of an RPG with action and shooter elements. But I think that in trying to introduce that third element of competent open-world shooter gameplay and setting the bar for production value as high as they did, CD Projekt Red lost their way and failed to deliver the role-playing experience they suggested they were going to be able to. I think Witcher 3 mixes RPG and action elements more effectively than Cyberpunk 2077 mixes RPG, action, and shooter elements. A lot of that is owed to the practical matter that it's easier to juggle two genres than three. Unfortunately, the action and the shooter elements end up siphoning enough focus away from their RPG cousin that the result is closer to Borderlands or Destiny than to New Vegas. 2077 has a lot of RPG features, like skill trees, equipment, and cyber gear with all kinds of numbers, rarities, and mods attached to them, and levels. However, the video game doesn't put these things to effective work in the story, or more relevantly, toward the role that you play. The V that you play in the cinematic Keanu Reeves action game we got is always a ruthlessly effective merc killer with an ambiguously slight Jersey accent who is a super hacker, arm wrestling expert marksman who can charismatically lead large groups of people to stick it to Arasaka. V is good at just about everything, canonically. Being able to put a round between a booster ganger's eyes at 200 meters while hacking Kang Tao's mainframe and reciting poetry out of both sides of your mouth might sound fun, but it's a far cry from the root concerns of the Cyberpunk source material. Mike Pondsmith, creator of the tabletop series 2077 is based on, has a simple guiding principle for how to roleplay in Cyberpunk's dark future. It's always street level. A good Cyberpunk game isn't about saving the world, it's about saving yourself. Cyberpunk 2077 gets this part right, with the focus of its main story being to save V's mind. But we continue reading. The heroes are not super heroic. At best, they're low to medium successful professionals who are often prone to having shady pasts and failures to live down. A good GM should assume the players have basic skills but are not totally badass. To expand on that, in the tabletop game you are not a samurai master, Night City's premier aviation expert, and the best cyber hacker to ever grace the net all at once. Pick one, or better yet, pick one and tone it down. You're probably good at what you do, not the best of the best. Your mission is likely not to steal from Yorinobu Arasaka and change the course of history. How about this instead? The rent is coming due for your bottom-of-the-barrel storage container apartment on the edge of the combat zone, and you're broke. Your fixer has a lead on a job for you that might put kibble on the table for a week. He needs you to rip off a truck of pricey organic chickens from a dumpling shop in Chinatown. Anything happens to the birds, it comes out of your pay, punk. On the other hand, V's capabilities in Cyberpunk 2077 seem to fit John Wick or Superman better than a street-level cyberpunk. Now, there's nothing actually wrong with taking this approach in the video game. There are badass mercs within the cyberpunk world who can wear lots of hats well. I'm thinking of figures like the legendary Solo, Morgan Blackhand. So my point is not that badass merc figures like V don't exist within the broader cyberpunk canon. But when you're playing 2077, you are always this badass merc figure. It's a somewhat narrow role-playing experience. 2077 has a lot of the master of all trades problem that is antithetical to genuine role-playing that Skyrim has. In Skyrim, the mechanics are such that the only thing you can really roleplay as within the bounds of the system is the indomitable, universally skilled Dragonborn. In Cyberpunk 2077, the mechanics are such that we are always playing the role of the indomitable, universally skilled merc V. The reasons why we wouldn't say Call of Duty is an RPG because you're playing the role of a soldier are the same reasons I hesitate to say Cyberpunk 2077 really hits the nail on the head as a role-playing game. Because in 2077, you're not choosing to roleplay as, say, a Ripper Doc or a cyber hacker or a corporate executive. Instead, you're always role-playing a narrowly defined super mercenary, V. Now, V participates in a lot of scenes that are written very, very well, but that doesn't necessarily entail you get to do much role-playing in them. Now, oddly enough, The Witcher 3 faces some of the same narrowing conditions for role-playing that Cyberpunk 2077 does, but somehow it manages to avoid making them into issues. Geralt is a Witcher, which is a very specific but versatile and powerful being in that universe. Versatile and powerful, not unlike our merc V. But that game is called The Witcher. In that game, you are offered the full flex in role-playing that's required to fully flesh out and explore the various roles one could fill as a Witcher. By contrast, Cyberpunk 2077 only properly represents one pretty specific type of guns-blazing cyberpunk. To CDPR's credit, what is here in the 2077 experience includes a ton of fantastic writing, including the numerous dialogue options and lesser handful of alternate quest choices related to Cyberpunk's 3 life paths. However, even the life paths at their most consequential amount to very truncated versions of Dragon Age Origins' 6 character backgrounds. Incidentally, Dragon Age Origins offers twice the number of life paths you get in 2077, and they're all longer. At their least consequential, Cyberpunk's life paths just pepper lines of flavor dialogue into conversations occasionally that give you another angle on the world, but offer little by way of material change to your situation. Overall, I really enjoyed Cyberpunk 2077 for what it is. But what it is not CD Projekt's New Vegas moment. It is not the AAA full-bore role-playing experience that could have picked up the torch of fully fleshed out CRPG magic for this new generation. But, rather than crawl under a rock and pray for the unlikely outcome that future updates will change the fundamental structure of Cyberpunk 2077, my friends and I got to thinking, which is dangerous. If Cyberpunk 2077 let us down as an RPG, why not go direct to the source and give the pen and paper game a shot? the tabletop game that made CD Projekt Red excited to make 2077 in the first place. The only trouble was, none of us had ever played a tabletop RPG before. Most of my familiarity with the genre stemmed from video games that owe their lineage to skill-based tabletop games, like Fallout 1 and 2, and from adventure call segments on Limmy's show.
Get troll.
You cannot get the troll.
Put troll in bag.
You cannot put the troll in the bag.
So we were going into this about as green as you can possibly be, which I'm sure some of you are watching this video. In this video, I'll be talking about how me and my friends channeled our disappointment with Cyberpunk 2077 into an unexpected new favorite multiplayer game that we're always looking forward to the next session of. If you're in a similar boat as I was with no familiarity with pen and paper games and disappointed with Cyberpunk 2077 and not familiar with the 2020 source material, then watch on, this one's for you. And if this isn't you, then keep watching anyway, don't click off the video, come on. So, the specific game we picked up is Cyberpunk 2020. This is the second edition of pen and paper Cyberpunk. The original game was published in 1988 and was just called Cyberpunk. In retrospect, it's useful to refer to this edition that started it all as Cyberpunk 2013 to reflect the year of its setting and to differentiate it from the much more popular second edition. That second edition, Cyberpunk 2020, is the one that we'll be spending some time focusing on today. It was published by Mike and his wife Lisa Pondsmith's company R Talsorian Games, an independent role-playing games company Mike and Lisa founded in 1985. Cyberpunk 2020 hit shelves in 1990 and cemented itself as a classic, becoming one of the most popular exemplars of its genre, with a rich world and flexible gameplay tools used in and expanded upon in many other games like Cyber Generation, a later R Talsorian project with spins off of Cyberpunk's world, and in fan projects like Interlock Unlimited, which improves and evolves the Cyberpunk rules so they can be turned loose in any setting you dream up. Moving ahead in our mini history lesson, 2005's edition of Cyberpunk, version 3.0, was not as successful as the second edition. Without getting too lost in the weeds here, this version 3 is more focused on transhumanist themes and is basically deprecated these days. The fourth edition, Cyberpunk Red, is the newest edition of tabletop Cyberpunk and is a real return to 2020 form. Developed in a sort of creative conversation with 2077, but still an R Talsorian project, Red is a game that looks to bridge the time gap between Cyberpunk 2020 and 2077. Set about dead in the middle between them in 2045, Cyberpunk Red hits reset on the Cyberpunk tabletop experience in a lot of ways, bringing the power creep of Cyberpunk 2020's library's worth of sourcebooks back down to earth with a world-ravaging war in the preceding years. It streamlines the gameplay tremendously, addressing most all the issues the 2020 community has raised over the decades about how that game works, especially net running. From everything I know, read, and hear people say, Cyberpunk Red is fantastic. But there are two reasons we chose to play Cyberpunk 2020 over Cyberpunk Red. The first reason, we know that Cyberpunk Red's mechanics are described to have evolved in more cinematic or abstract ways, in contrast with Cyberpunk 2020's more exacting, realistic gameplay mechanics. It's more streamlined, Red. As our very first tabletop RPG, we thought it'd be a fun challenge to go for the older, crunchier, more nuts and bolts forward design of the older second edition, to get really detailed about simulating every round leaving the chamber and penetrating flesh. The second reason for the choice, I think, is the real reason that we settled on 2020. CD Projekt Red and Cyberpunk 2077 had nothing to do with its existence. Now, the story I gather from various interviews is that Cyberpunk Red was already a twinkle in Mike Pondsmith's eye before CD Projekt suggested developing a video game based on the license, but it wouldn't have been published when it was published, nor would it have taken exactly the form it takes today if not for our mutual friends in Poland. And I want to be utterly clear, do I think CD Projekt Red influenced the design of Cyberpunk Red in any substantial or negative way? No, I know that Red is an R Talsorian game. However, it is vaguely, orbitally associated with CD Projekt, a company which had just left a bad taste in our mouths. And this will sound silly, but we wanted to get a taste of the game that sparked the world's interest, including CD Projekt's interest, in cyberpunk role-playing in the first place. A game from a simpler time, before the drama around the launch of the AAA mega product that is Cyberpunk 2077 absorbed the conversation. Speaking of absorbing the conversation, 2077 really is like a black hole when you're trying to find any information about the Cyberpunk tabletop game on Google. Word to the wise, throw a little -2077 on your search if you want to find anything vaguely related to the pen and paper game. To summarize, our choice of 2020 over Red was down to taste and taste. I have nothing against Red whatsoever. Deep down, both games share the same beating heart, the same carbon fiber, oxygen-efficient cyber heart installed by the Ripper Doc down the corner in exchange for a favor. Our group settled on Cyberpunk 2020, and I took on the role of Game Master, which I had never done before. And with that, we set out to scouring the rules and building our characters in the process. Trying to GM for the first time with zero tabletop experience can be really intimidating. There's an implicit pressure to know the rules better than everyone else, to have all the answers to everyone's questions, to furnish the player's world with things to hang on to and act upon in a way that's enjoyable. A few factors worked in my favor to make my first time running the game a really fun and positive experience rather than a nerve-wracking one. I'm going to walk you through 4 of those factors. First, and most importantly, I was GMing for the first time with my friends and my brother as the players. Right there, for us at least, that meant the vibe was good-natured and understanding. Second, we treated the process of learning the rules as a cooperative exercise. There was no expectation of, you should already know that, duh, from me or my players. When we weren't sure how to handle something early on, we would either pause and figure it out, or bracket the issue, and then we'd resolve that given problem with something I made up, and then someone could look up that rule while I run the rest of the players' turns. This worked well and kept us learning together in the course of play. Third, I personally found GMing a lot more fun than I thought it could be, and it's easier to try to practice and improve at something you enjoy. And I found that the different parts of the GMing process played to a lot of my interest. Back in college, I double majored in writing and quantitative economics. GMing lets me put the writing to use, making these scenarios and trying to fill them with interesting people and stories that are fun to engage with as a player. The crunchiness of the mechanics also lets me put the math economics to use. I even put some game theory, not that game theory, this game theory, to try to model the outcomes of our group of players cracking a certain safe or not, to help me gauge how accessible I should make alternate routes of getting the information they need. To continue to draw some of these dopey parallels to my time in university, my performing and directing live sketch comedy there was good practice at managing the energy of a crowd to keep people entertained, at keeping a show with many moving parts moving along. It's not unlike the experience of trying to manage a game that is fun for the players but doesn't degenerate into chaos. Or if it does degenerate into chaos, which is fun too, we're able to channel that in an entertaining way. Wow, all these good times back in college, all of this debt suddenly seems worth it now that I can game master. Fuck me. Fourth, and finally, there are lots of great resources on YouTube and elsewhere that make this game easy to run. One channel in particular, John the Wise, was instrumental in getting me up and running with this game. His GM's Guide series was a really approachable way for me to get our whole group up and running with our Cyberpunk 2020 game in an online tabletop tool called Roll20. The advice on his channel ranges from big picture stuff like how to structure a campaign to very technical details like how to calculate damage and how armor works, things like that. I'll share one of his pieces of advice that I've adapted and use in every single session I run now. It's called the 3 Goon method. It's a quick way to generate NPCs for players to do battle with or check their stats against without agonizing over that NPC's entire character sheet for trivial one-off interactions. Gives you a series of shortcuts to generate initiative and damage for different tiers of goons. It's a real lifesaver at keeping things moving. I adapted the method by adding 2 additional tiers of granularity, gutter trash, and strong. Further to how helpful John and his community are, part of the reason I felt empowered to make homebrew tweaks like the one I just described is because of the awesomely helpful homebrew channel on his Discord, where, incidentally, employees of R Talsorian like to hang out sometimes too. The community, both John's and the pen and paper cyberpunk community at large, is way more helpful than communities you usually see online. I think every game master remembers what it's like to be new at this and daunted by the rulebook. It's nice to see that they tend to pay it forward and help others out. So, what is Cyberpunk 2020 all about? If you, like me, are coming into this from 2077 first, you don't have to concern yourself with the particulars of how Cyberpunk 2020's world differs from 2077's at this stage. The Pondsmith cyberpunk world in general is kind of like a sandbox full of wonderful toys, in-game entities, corpses, places, and faces to move around as you will to try to make a good and memorable time for your players. While the constructs unique to this world like Arasaka, Night City, Johnny Silverhand, and so on are sufficiently original to be interesting, the broad strokes of this world will be familiar to anyone familiar with the cyberpunk genre, whether that be the progenitors of the Pondsmith cyberpunk world like Blade Runner, or successors to it like Blade Runner 2049? Bad example. Altered Carbon? I don't like that show. Whatever, cyberpunk as a genre is a cultural staple at this point. Even if the cultural cachet of cyberpunk wasn't quite as established in 1990 when Pondsmith was publishing Cyberpunk 2020, it's been all but reified as a genre now. Just about everyone has some passing familiarity with cyberpunk writ large, and passing familiarity with the genre is all you need to jump into the tabletop game and start playing. So for example, you don't need to know the detailed personal biography of Antonio Lucchesi, founder of Militech, to roll a machine gun wielding Militech employed cyber soldier and start blasting people. However, if your character were a professor of military history, say, at Night City University, it might be wise to read up on Lucchesi's early years cutting his teeth on weapon manufacture at companies like Beretta and Colt before founding the Armatech Lucchesi Corporation in 1996, the corporate progenitor of what would become one of the largest military-industrial megacorps of the dark future. What's the point of that tangent? The key appeal of Cyberpunk 2020 over Cyberpunk 2077 is the flexibility in role-playing that only the tabletop system can provide. You can be a professor of military history and focus on all this stuff if you so choose. Or you can be a straight-up, flesh-and-metal cyber warrior. Or a journalist trying to blow a case of police corruption wide open. Or you could be one of those dirty cops being reported on. It's all wide open. Instead of 2077's one role with some play in the joints, all-powerful master of all trades V, Cyberpunk 2020 offers 9 functional roles in its core rulebook, all of which are functionally distinct. More are supplied in later sourcebooks, and you're free to invent your own. But those 9 key roles are described as rocker boys, hard rock heroes fighting for change with music and revolution. Solos, corporate cyber soldiers, more machines than men. Netrunners, super hot hackers who can crack any data fortress. Medias, high-tech reporters going to the wall to get the truth. Nomads, cyber-biking renegades cruising the lethal highways of the post-Holocaust. Corporates, slick business raiders playing the deadly corporate power game. Techies, masters of cybernetics in the heavy metal age. Fixers, street-smart middlemen who know all the angles. And cops, maximum lawmen in the big city jungle. If you're familiar with Cyberpunk 2077, you might see nomads and corporates in that list, and think, hey, these roles must be similar to the life paths in 2077. In a way, they are, and in a way, they aren't. There is a separate life path system in 2020 that more closely relates to your character's personal history, the friends and enemies they've made along the way, their socioeconomic status, their priorities in life, etc. The role system, by contrast, more closely relates to the way your character acts upon the world. The key word there is acts. Cyberpunk 2020 is at its core a skill-based role-playing game. The basic unit of gameplay is your player character acting upon the world through their skills. The roles define the basic basket of skills your character will start off with proficiencies in. You get a handful of skills in your career skills package. These are specific to your role, and you have 40 points to spread amongst this basket. The rest of your skills, you're free to assign up to the sum of your character's reflex and intelligence stats. This is like your character's natural talent. These are called pickup skills, skills which lie outside your character's career path, but that they've picked up just knocking around over the course of their lives. For instance, a character in the medtech role knows the pharmaceutical skill as part of their career, but they might also know handgun as a pickup skill, needing to be able to defend themselves walking to and from the clinic on the mean streets of Night City. You get the idea. Let me introduce you to our core group of player characters. This is Rando Royenthal, a high-level fixer who prefers to blend in with the streets rather than flash his wealth. He's seldom seen wearing anything but his signature trash bag. Paulie Walnuts, a badass nomad wanderer from the Sopranos crime family. Back up there, Bluto. Johnny Blackhand, a heart-melting rocker boy who's secretly the scion of a wealthy corporate family, the White Hands. Johnny got one of his arms replaced with an African-American's as a statement of some kind. The different roles these characters fit into come with a special ability. Special abilities are the key skills that define the way a character in a role acts upon the world in the most unique way to them. It's one of the principal ways Cyberpunk 2020 offers a much more specified and rich role-playing experience rather than the more generalized Master of All Trades experience of 2077. To walk you through what these abilities look like for the three characters I've just introduced you to, Rando is the group's fixer. His special ability is Street Deal. As a fixer, Rando's Street Deal skill is an approximation of how well connected he is, how reliably he's able to find what he needs to find when he needs to find it. It's how he knows who he needs to know and which palms to grease. When the group is gearing up for a mission, Rando is the one who's able to put his feelers out with his Street Deal and get Paulie that H&K MPK-11 submachine gun that he wanted. Speaking of Paulie, as a nomad, is able to call upon members of his nomad family or clan for help in different situations by applying his special ability appropriately called Family. Given Paulie is part of the Soprano crime family, there are lots of colorful nomad clanmates to rope into the game when Paulie wants to make use of his special ability. And Johnny, as a rocker boy, has the gift of charismatic leadership. Johnny can apply his special ability to the group's benefit through the power of the mob, leveraging his fan base and his command over crowds to be able to turn ideas into action. And then my role as the game master is to paint a scenario for the players in our game that lends itself to everyone getting a chance to shine in the roles they've chosen to play and have a good time in the process. Pretty much every aspect of living in the cyberpunk world is mechanically modeled, down to monthly income, expenses including food, rent, armor, maintenance of equipment, medical bills, etc. The physics of vehicles are modeled with dice rolls. There are pages of modifiers altering the difficulty of skill checks in varying levels of lighting conditions. Different types of armors, of which there are many, offer differing layers of protection. If you layer armors, then there are proportional bonuses to your armor which change depending on how different in protection level the different armor pieces are. Bullets are not just applied as damage generically to characters, but are individually applied to individual limbs. Mortal wounds and crippling injuries are individually tracked for all player and non-player characters. You can get as detailed as you want when it comes to modeling this stuff, and this is part of the appeal of Cyberpunk 2020. You can get as detailed as you like, or you can avoid these things if you want, or alternatively find homebrew solutions that simplify them if you want to include them but don't want to deal with all the hassle. It's up to you. Homebrew solutions are common because sometimes the mechanics can get excessive if you play the rules as written. Automatic fire is one of the most obnoxious examples of this. Like I said before, the combat in Cyberpunk 2020 involves modeling every bullet when it comes to automatic fire. If your players and the dice conspire to have one of your player characters blast a heavily armored NPC with tons of automatic fire, or more unfortunately vice versa, then buckle up because you have about a thesis worth of math to do. This is one of those things I mentioned that they fixed between Cyberpunk 2020 and Cyberpunk Red. Some advice online and directly from R Talsorian themselves, like in the seminal "Listen Up, You Primitive Screwheads" GM's Guide, suggests solving for automatic fire in 2020 by simply discouraging it as a game master. I disfavor this approach. We agreed to run a pretty high-powered game to start to sort of flex the system and test the limits of the world, so players and non-players alike were spraying each other with bullets by the second or third session, and they had armor to keep up. The power level made sense too because one of the player characters was a connected fixer. Of course he'd be able to source this stuff. Why is the amount of bullets flying through the air a problem? Let me try to explain how automatic fire works in 2020. Let's say Paulie Walnuts is spraying this mook whose leg is caught in a bear trap with an SMG at close range. At close range, the number he needs to beat is a 15. Paulie rolls a d10, let's say he rolls an 8, and adds it to his reflex stat of 9 plus his SMG skill of 7. That's a total of 24. The rate of fire of Paulie's weapon is 20. For automatic fire, the rules say for every 10 rounds fired at close range, we add 1 to our attack total. So for 20 rounds, that's 2 added to our attack totals. That brings us to a total of 26. Now let's factor in the bear trap. Can't forget the bear trap. The target is immobile, so that adds another +4 to the attack total, bringing us to 30. 30 minus our 2-hit number of 15 gives us a difference of 15. 15 rounds are going to hit our target. That means we have to roll a d10 now, 15 times, to determine where each of these bullets is going to hit. The result of each d10 will determine which body part will hit. Here are the results of those rolls. Next, we need to determine how much damage each of those 15 shots do. Paulie's rounds are armor-piercing, so to factor this correctly, we have to take the armor value of the mook, divided by 2 since the round is armor-piercing, then compare that result to a damage roll, which, for this weapon, is 4d6s plus 1, halved since these rounds are armor-piercing. That, then, is applied as damage, and doubled if that damage is done to the head. Also, if the round is armor-piercing and penetrates, i.e. does more than 0 damage, then you decrement the piece of armor it hits by 1 point, and treat that piece of armor as that much weaker if it takes another hit. Rinse and repeat. Here are the end results. All that to tell us that the target is dead. But what if the target was wearing 3 layers of ultra-heavy armor? Different story then, and if that was the case, here's how our mook would look. Not doing well, but not instantly dead either. A lot to crunch though, and a lot of individual damage to the different parts of his body to keep track of. This can take an obscene amount of time without some way to simplify. There are solutions out there online, but none worked quite the way I wanted them to. So I spent many hours building a spreadsheet to try to handle auto-fire in the most accurate way possible. A link to the Google Sheets version of this file is attached in the description. It's still kind of cumbersome and there are some edge cases it doesn't handle quite so elegantly, but now I have a way to have players and NPCs alike spray each other with miniguns and model it all accurately, in just a couple seconds, avoiding slowing the game down. Now, it's a bit slower still than auto-fire in 2077, which looks like this.
¡Pinches ratas! ¡A la chingada antes de que las vea! ¡Ya lo tenemos!
But it's 1,000 times more satisfying and lethal. 2020's net running is a squirrelier challenge to work around. As written, you have to run 2 battle maps as the game master to support a netrunner, and the rules are very involved to say the least. Cyberpunk Red implemented some widely praised improvements to the netrunning systems, but these improvements find their earliest seeds in community netrunning homebrews for 2020 like Run.net, a set of elegant netrunning rules I run in our group's game. It makes the netrunning mechanically work more like it does in Red and 2077. It allows netrunners to be more active and involved with the real world alongside the rest of their party. Let's press pause on this mechanical mumbo-jumbo for a second and zoom back out to the beautiful part of this game. You can engage with as much or as little of this crunchy technical stuff as you want. Our group was interested in learning this stuff and really getting into it, so that's what we did. You can gloss over all of it and run a very RP-heavy campaign driven by intrigue, love triangles, betrayal, fast-talking, and subterfuge. Or you can shoot your players into space and lob nuclear warheads at each other, and meticulously calculate the damage you do to each orbital colony. More than likely, you'll have a good time finding some happy medium between the RP and the mechanical approaches like we have. I've run about a dozen sessions or so for our group since December 2020. Fitting we were able to fit in our first game in a twisted retro-future version of the year the game is set in. We're having an absolute blast with Cyberpunk 2020 still. We started off by running a Session 0, a no-strings-attached dry run to get a feel for the mechanics and running the game. The gang met up with a 400-pound Senegalese solo named Turbo. Turbo was bringing some info to his fixer, our player Rando. This info was a lead about a possible heist that Turbo didn't quite have the resources to execute on alone. But as the gang discusses the details of this potential gig over synthetic pizza at Cheesy Joe's, the University District's hottest synth pizza joint, they pass an awareness skill check to notice some surveillance cameras in the corner of the restaurant, hidden. Peculiar. They then see that the bathroom is similarly bugged. One thing leads to another, and the gang discovers the pizza shop is so successful that Kang Tao was spying on the owner 24/7 to conduct illegal market research on how to open the world's most successful pizza chain, to outcompete all others with ruthless military-industrial efficiency. Who cares if Kang Tao would never really get in the pizza business? This was our game and it was our first session, so whatever. The gang accepts a bribe of €1,000 from a Kang Tao suit to keep quiet about the pizza scheme and not mention anything to the owner so that the corp can continue to conduct their research. $1,000 was worth more to our players than protecting some random pizza guy from getting spied on, and so turns the circle of pizza. Keep it personal, keep it street level. The group was able to use some of the bribe to fund some low-level one-shot capers, which evolved into mid-level one-shot capers, which now find us in our next mission, facing the final event of our months-long campaign involving corporate intrigue and marital drama at the highest echelons of power in the Savoil Corporation. Our party is locked, loaded, and armed with hard-won information they're ready to put into practice to gain the upper hand in the fight of their lives. A Bayside showdown on the water, trying to take down their target at a concert the group is organizing and performing at themselves. They've come so far from pizza-related corporate espionage, and it's been a really fun journey getting from there to here. It's really rewarding to come up with a campaign, execute on it, and see your friends enjoy playing out their personalized stories and arcs together within it. You can go as jank or professional as you want with this. You can run Cyberpunk with no map at all, or make use of incredibly detailed battle maps. Some people in the community and on John's Discord have made some super impressive maps. Generally, here's what I do. I draw the skeleton of the map on graph paper, the walls and passages, all that stuff. Then, I take a photo, bring it into the computer and clean up the holes and color and such. Then, I import the drawing into Roll20, align the graph of the paper to the graph of the site, then turn on the dynamic lighting feature and add different props. And yes, the dynamic lighting feature is Pro only. I subscribe to the Pro to get that dynamic lighting feature alone. That's because it's exciting when it's used properly. Like, for instance, the leg of our campaign that saw our group ambushed with the power cut in a winding underground black site used by Savoil to interrogate prisoners. Light and line of sight became critically important in those dark, narrow passages with cover, and Roll20 let us simulate that exactly how we wanted to. It was worth it, to me at least. I enjoy the hand-drawn feel of these maps, even if they're anything but high fidelity. Plus, I get to make them exactly how I want this way, which is sort of the overall point of playing Cyberpunk 2020 in the first place. And this brings me back to the broader point of this video. Cyberpunk 2077 wasn't quite the role-playing game we wanted it to be. The scope of the role-playing on offer was very narrow, offering a singular, Skyrim-y, super hacker, silver-tongued Terminator merc role for V. Thankfully, the source material 2077 is based on, Cyberpunk 2020, is a truly fantastic role-playing game that gives you the flexibility to take on any role that you can credibly describe and fit into this vivid world. The practical challenges of translating your campaign idea into a AAA experience that will run on base model PS4s do not apply to the pen and paper medium. Your only constraint is what you can dream up. At the time of writing, Steam says I have 81.7 hours in Cyberpunk 2077. If the statistics on Roll20 are to be believed, I have 307 hours in our Cyberpunk 2020 lobby, and that would only account for the time spent within the virtual tabletop. It's hardly inclusive of all the time spent learning the rules, reading and watching every resource I could get my hands on, and preparing scenarios, NPCs, and battle maps for the group to enjoy. If I had to do a comparative prognosis at this point on both games, I don't see myself playing any more Cyberpunk 2077 before significant story DLC comes out. Cyberpunk 2020, on the other hand, is a joy to play every time. I look forward to getting the group together for many more sessions. To wrap things up, if you felt let down by Cyberpunk 2077's relatively fluffy role-playing experience, why not give Cyberpunk 2020 a shot? We were able to stumble into an awesome new game to play together that far exceeded our expectations through this exact rebound process. If you're interested, what are you waiting for? Why not give it a shot? Who knows? I might even stream one of our Cyberpunk 2020 sessions someday. If I do, I'll announce the time on my YouTube community page and on Twitter. Thanks again for watching. My name is Mike. Hope to see you again in the dark future with some more videos soon. And if you liked the video, why not consider liking, subscribing, and hitting the bell? There will be more content like this to come soon. Thanks for watching.